Welcome back, everyone, to the EMT Spot's Blood Pressure Podcast. I'm Samuel Harrison.
And I'm Olivia Harper.
And we are so glad to have you with us today for another deep dive into all things blood pressure.
And today's topic is a really interesting one, something I think we've all wondered about at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
What happens to your blood pressure when you hold your breath?
Yeah, does it go up? Does it go down?
And how long can you actually hold your breath safely?
Right, because we know holding your breath for too long can be dangerous. But there's also this growing interest in using breath-holding techniques in healthcare, like in medical imaging and even in radiotherapy.
Yeah, I've heard about that, using breath holding to minimize radiation exposure to the heart during breast cancer treatment. Pretty fascinating stuff.
It is really interesting. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think it's important to really understand what's going on inside our bodies when we hold our breath, particularly how it affects our blood pressure.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the physiology of breath holding.
Right, so when we hold our breath, what's actually happening?
Well, first of all, your oxygen levels start to decrease.
Okay, makes sense.
And your carbon dioxide levels, they begin to increase, and this is called hypoxia.
Hypoxia, right?
And as that CO2 builds up, it triggers this involuntary reflex to breathe.
That's like your body's saying, hey, I need some oxygen here.
Exactly. And you've probably felt this yourself, right? That initial burning sensation in your lungs.
Oh, yeah.
And then those diaphragm contractions start to kick in.
Which can be pretty uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes even painful.
So that's what's happening on the inside. But what about the impact on blood pressure?
Well, a study published in the British Institute of Radiology journal showed that even in healthy young people, blood pressure increases progressively during breath holding.
Really?
Yeah, and for deep inspiratory breath holds where you take a really big breath, and the average systolic blood pressure jumped from 133 to 175 millimillar Hg.
Wow, that's a significant jump.
It is, and in some cases it even spiked to 200 millimillar Hg.
200, that's getting into a danger zone, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely something to be aware of, and it's not just because of the lack of oxygen either.
Oh, so it's not as simple as just depriving the body of oxygen.
Right. Researchers actually had participants pre-oxygenate, meaning they breathed pure oxygen before holding their breath, and it didn't prevent the blood pressure from rising.
Interesting. So what else could be causing this spike?
Well, one theory is that it's a reflex triggered by the diaphragm muscle as it works to hold the breath.
Oh, okay. So the harder the diaphragm has to work, the higher the blood pressure goes.
Exactly. It's like your body's putting on the brakes saying, hey, this isn't sustainable.
Makes sense. But what about heart rate? Does it slow down when you hold your breath like people often think?
That's where things get even more interesting. You'd think it would. But this study found no significant decrease in heart rate during breath holding.
Wait, really? So our blood pressure is climbing, but our heart rate stays pretty steady.
Pretty much. There were slight increases during the initial inhalation and the first breath after, but during the hold itself, heart rate remained relatively stable.
Huh. Another myth busted, I guess. This is way more complicated than I initially thought.
It is. There's a lot going on beneath the surface.
Well, this has been a fascinating start to our deep dive into breath holding and its effects on blood pressure.
Definitely. And we've only just scratched the surface.
We'll be back after a quick break to discuss the safety concerns and potential benefits of breath holding, so stay tuned. All right, so we're back, and we've been talking about the fascinating and somewhat surprising effects of breath holding on blood pressure.
Yeah, we've learned that it can cause a significant spike even in healthy individuals.
Exactly, and it's not just about the lack of oxygen. There's a whole muscular component involved with the diaphragm working overtime.
Right, and that leads us to an important question. What are the safety concerns surrounding breath holding?
Yeah, especially as EMTs, we need to be aware of the potential risks for our patients.
Absolutely. So while short breath holds are generally well tolerated by healthy people, it's a different story for individuals with pre-existing conditions.
Like, what kind of conditions are we talking about?
Things like heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, or hypertension.
So people with a history of heart problems or high blood pressure.
Exactly. For them, those spikes in blood pressure could be really dangerous.
What kind of complications could we see in the field?
Well, potentially anything from a sudden increase in blood pressure leading to dizziness or fainting to a more serious cardiac event like a heart attack or stroke.
Wow, that's scary.
It is. And we also have to remember that breath holding leads to oxygen desaturation, which can be especially risky for patients with heart or circulatory problems.
Right, their bodies might not be able to handle even a temporary dip in oxygen levels.
Exactly. So as EMTs, it's crucial to consider whether a patient has been holding their breath when we're assessing them.
Even if it's unintentional.
Right. Kick could be a contributing factor to their current state.
So something as simple as asking, have you been holding your breath?
Yeah.
could give us valuable insight.
Absolutely. And this knowledge is also really important for medical procedures that involve breath holding.
Oh, right, like those imaging scans you mentioned earlier.
Exactly, that study we talked about made some key recommendations for medical professionals in those situations.
Like what?
Well, firstly, they emphasize the importance of screening patients for any cardiovascular risks beforehand.
So taking a thorough medical history to rule out any heart disease or hypertension?
Right, catching those red flags early could prevent serious complications.
Makes sense. Anything else?
They also stress the importance of monitoring blood pressure and oxygen saturation levels throughout the procedure.
So basically keeping a close eye on those vital signs.
Exactly. That way, medical professionals can intervene immediately if they see any dangerous spikes or drops.
What are the specific thresholds we should be looking out for?
The study suggests that a systolic blood pressure above 180 mmHg or an oxygen saturation below 94% are clear indicators that the patient needs to stop holding their breath.
Got it. 180 and 94. Those are good numbers to remember.
Definitely, this information is so valuable for EMTs because we're often dealing with patients in critical situations.
Absolutely. But let's not paint a completely doom and gloom picture here.
All right.
Are there any potential benefits to breath holding that we should be aware of?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes, there are some potential benefits being studied.
Really? Like what?
Well, some research suggests that breath holding can actually improve lung function, almost like a mini workout for your respiratory system.
So building up those respiratory muscles.
Exactly. And there's also evidence that it might help reduce inflammation, which could be beneficial for certain conditions.
Interesting. Okay.
And
Well,
here's where it gets really fascinating. Some animal studies even suggest that breath holding could have neuroprotective effects.
wait, neuroprotective, you mean protecting the brain?
Yeah, it's still early research, but the findings suggest that it might help protect the brain from damage.
Wow, that's incredible. So breath holding could be both beneficial and risky depending on the individual and the context.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the nuances and applying that knowledge to specific situations.
Well, this has been an eye-opening conversation for sure. It's amazing how much we can learn from something as simple as holding our breath.
It really is, and it just goes to show that there's always more to learn even about the things we think we understand.
Absolutely well said. So what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners, especially our fellow EMTs?
I think the most important takeaway is awareness, both for ourselves and our patients. We need to be mindful of how our own bodies respond to breath holding and recognize the potential risks, especially for individuals with underlying health conditions.
Right, and as EMTs, we need to incorporate this knowledge into our assessments and understand how breath holding might be impacting our patients.
Exactly. It's all about connecting the dots and using that knowledge to provide the best possible care.
Well said. This has been another fantastic deep dive into the world of blood pressure. I'm Samuel Harrison.
And I'm Olivia Harper.
Thank you for joining us on the EMT Spot's Blood Pressure Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like this episode, leave a comment, and share it with your colleagues. Until next time, stay curious and keep breathing. It's pretty amazing how something we do without even thinking can have such a big impact on our bodies.
It really is. We take breathing for granted so often.
Yeah, totally. And, it makes you think about how this knowledge about breath holding and blood pressure could be useful in other ways beyond emergency medicine.
Oh, absolutely. Like, think about relaxation techniques, meditation, yoga. A lot of those practices involve controlling your breath or even holding it intentionally.
Yeah, that's true.
Knowing how breath holding affects blood pressure and heart rate could help people practice those techniques more safely and get more out of them.
Right, like it could actually enhance the relaxation experience if you're more in tune with those physiological changes.
Exactly. It's all about that mind-body connection.
Mm.
And this knowledge could be really helpful for athletes too, especially those in sports that require breath holding like swimming or free diving.
Oh, for sure. Those athletes need to be aware of the risks and train safely to protect their health and improve their performance.
Definitely. So we've learned a lot today about the physiology, the risks, the benefits.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. It really highlights the importance of staying curious and always learning new things.
I couldn't agree more. There's always something new to discover, even about things we think we already understand.
Well said. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go back to our original question. How long can we safely hold our breath?
The million-dollar question. Unfortunately, there's no easy answer. It really depends on the individual, their health, their fitness level, the specific situation.
Right, there's no magic number that applies to everyone.
Exactly. But what we can say for sure is listen to your body. If you start feeling lightheaded, dizzy, or any chest discomfort, that's your cue to stop and breathe.
And as always, if you have any underlying health conditions, especially anything related to your heart or circulatory system, talk to your doctor before trying any breath-holding exercises or techniques.
Absolutely. Better to be safe than sorry.
Couldn't agree more. Well, this has been another fascinating deep dive into the world of blood pressure. I'm Samuel Harrison.
And I'm Olivia Harper.
Thank you so much for joining us on the EMT-Spot's Blood Pressure Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like this episode, and share it with your colleagues and anyone else who might be interested. Until next time, stay curious and keep breathing